Hey, it is in fact a beautiful day in the neighborhood. How do you like that opening for Think Tank, the podcast? I'm Steve Adubato. I'm here in the studio with Nicole Swenerton, the senior producer of Think Tank, the broadcast, Laura Van Bloom, who is your title, it's like she's the head of all communications, marketing, and anything we need to do that matters in the community and telling people, right?
That's about right, yeah.
Yeah, put that on a card, see what happens. Michaela Batts is in fact one of the top young producers on our team. And let me set up this podcast before we tell people how to find us. We actually went to Vermont. Tell folks why, Laura, we went to Vermont, because you're heading up this initiative called Right From the Start. And Jay, about infants and toddlers. Go.
Yeah, we went up to Shelburne, Vermont, beautiful location, because the Turrell Fund was putting on their annual Turrell Fund Day for Children in Vermont. It's a wonderful event where they convene people.
Turrell Fund's a foundation.
Turrell Fund is the foundation. I'm also an underwriter of our programming.
To disclose.
And they have an annual event where they convene people from different parts of the country that come together to address a particular issue regarding early childhood development. They mostly come from Vermont and New Jersey because that's where Turrell Fund has its roots. But it was a wonderful day, and the theme this year was all about love and the idea that love and nurturing and attention for young children greatly impacts early childhood development.
And so, in fact, Mr. Rogers, who, as I was singing, it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood, the reason, Michaela, why we talked about that is that Fred Rogers, the iconic, great Fred Rogers, who helped make public broadcasting what it is, in the late 1960s, broke into a PBS with a children's show that people were like, nobody's going to watch that. And someone he had on that program was someone we interviewed up in Vermont, and he is, in fact, Dr. Francois Clemmons, who is a singer-actor and was on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and he played Officer
Clemmons.
Why was that so important?
Because he was one of the first African Americans with a recurring role on a kids' TV series in 1968.
Okay, so, Nicole, think back. You were not around. You were barely around.
I watched it.
Why do you think Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and how Francois Clemmons, who you'll hear on this podcast, why was and why is it, even today, great documentary, by the way, put out about Mr. Rogers, check it out. Why is it even more important today than ever before with all the hatred, polarization, and people just not getting along?
Oh, I think it's so important today, teaching kids how to be good people, teaching kids the importance of love, talking to kids about the difficult things in life is not something that children's media really does today. And treating it with care and the love that Mr. Rogers did, I think, is something that would be greatly appreciated in today's society. So I think it was an iconic television show that I'm sure shaped a lot of people as they were growing up.
And the other thing is that Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers, had the courage. People go, oh, what a nice guy. Yeah. He also had the courage, the integrity, the intestinal fortitude to put Francois Clemmons on the air on a children's program disproportionately watched by white kids. Think about that. 1968, the year that Dr. King was assassinated, the year that Robert Kennedy was assassinated, the year that all across this country, cities, including the community I grew up in, Newark, New Jersey, were burning down. Detroit, Watts, Philadelphia. He put Francois Clemmons on the air as not just a cop, but a cop who was loved in a community of white people. That's not a small deal.
It's definitely not. During a time when everyone just wasn't getting along and there's just so many horrible things going on, he just really knew that it was important to include all races on the television. That's what everyone needed to see. And that was just incredibly important and significant.
My final comment, so Edward R. Murrow, who was at CBS News, came over to PBS at a certain point. And what he said about PBS is that television has the potential to teach, inspire, and motivate people to be their best. But if we choose not to use television to be those things, television simply wires in a box. Wires in a box. Well, Fred Rogers decided that they weren't going to be wires in a box. They would teach, motivate, and inspire people. And that's what Francois Clemmons did. And when we sat down with him in Vermont, that's what he's about to tell you and share with you. And that extraordinary, historic, iconic experience at PBS with Mr. Rogers. Think Tank, the podcast. This is Steve Adubato. More importantly, you're going to listen to Dr. Francois Clemmons, who was, in fact, Officer Clemmons on this great show. Check it out. We are honored to be sitting with an iconic figure in media, in the arts, and in the world of Fred Rogers, who we recognize today. This is Dr. Francois Clemmons, singer, actor, And he was Officer Clemmons in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood starting in 1968. Tell folks, and by the way, we'll show some footage of Officer Clemmons while you're talking. Who was he and why did he matter so much, sir?
Well, I was the first black person to have a steady role in children's television. Fred was a visionary, and I think he knew how important it was to have representation of all races, not just white people. So he invited me to come on the show and to sing. That's what I am. I'm a singer. And he thought up a role that I would do as a helper. They talk about a helper a lot. And there were some problems, some racial problems that he was trying to address in his own way. In our culture, Dr. King was very active at the time, and there were some assassinations, Robert Kennedy. And he thought that these things needed some way of expression among young children. They were aware of what was going on, and he was totally concerned about the effect it would have on children. He felt it was best for them to know that the neighborhood had people of all races and all colors. And we were friends in our private life as well as we were on television.
You said he was a mentor of yours.
Yes, he was my mentor in the sense that he encouraged me to continue my operatic career, to continue my auditions, my studying, and the traveling that it involved. It was very difficult, I tell you very honestly. And many times I called him on the phone and he gave me encouragement. And you have to take language lessons and coachings and voice lessons, and it's very expensive. And I couldn't have done it had he not stuck by me the way he did. He saw to it. Times when I was discouraged, he said, no, you've come too far. You've done too much, Francois. You can't stop now. So, and he was also, I say, my biggest fan. He came to hear me New York City Opera and Philadelphia and Pittsburgh and Cleveland, Chicago. Whenever I sang, I'd look up and there he was sitting out there in the audience.
When you were Officer Clemmons on that show, there's a scene in the documentary. Make sure you check out the documentary on Fred Rogers. There's a scene that was shown that really struck me where Fred Rogers, you were one of the big helpers in the neighborhood, and he was washing your feet.
First?
Oh, I don't want him to get wet.
Right.
That feels great.
Right here.
You know, when you're a policeman, you do an awful lot of walking, and sometimes your feet get tired.
Right.
That feels better already.
Good.
A big, important, significant scene because...
Well, Fred was a Presbyterian minister. He was ordained, and so he often referred to Scripture without specifically mentioning Jesus or Peter or Paul or any of the particular Elijah or whoever the characters were in that particular scene that he was fashioning in a way that could relate to children. And one of the things he was showing is how people of different colors can relate to one another and how they can love each one another and care about one another and show. In fact, he wrote this song, there are many ways to say I love you. There are many ways to say I care about you. Many ways, many ways, many ways to say I love you. And the bells are accompanying me.
Because it's noon here in Vermont.
How about that?
And everywhere on the East Coast. and by the way, I love that they're playing. That's happening while you're singing.
Yes, I think so.
You're used to all kinds of things when you're performing, right?
Yes, I am. You have to keep going singing, So he wrote that for me because I was on the show and he wanted to show how Peter and Jesus and he was a Christian, but he didn't want to beat people over the head. But his nature, he was humble. He believed that people who loved you served you, and that this was a way to show that he loved me, and he wanted people to know that was important. And it didn't matter what color I was. Or who? No, it did not matter at all. And so the idea of going through those motions helped people to understand the scene that we were mirroring had to do with the swimming pools in urban centers around America where some of the white people did not want black people in their swimming pools, even though they were paying taxes like everybody else.
And Fred Rogers, you just broke down all those barriers. And what message does it send to all those children watching?
It told the children, Mr. Rogers is not a racist, he's not prejudiced, and he survived. Maybe it's okay for me to be like that too. And that message was very important.
this whole theme of this conference that the Turrell Fund is putting together, Turrell Fund Day for our children here in Shelburne, Vermont. Did you think much about when you're on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and do you think a lot about now? How much do you think about now infants and toddlers and how they are developing or not, and the impact that you had on them and we need to have on them now, particularly in the media? I know it's a loaded question.
Well, I have to tell you that it goes much further sometimes than I'm aware. I've lived here for 22 years in Vermont. I love Vermont. They're wonderful people here. But as I've traveled around the country, particularly since they've done the movie Won't You Be My Neighbor, I think it's a wonderful job that Morgan Neville did.
That's the Fred Rogers movie.
The Mr. Rogers movie, and it's about his life and his work. I just think that's wonderful. And they've invited me to come and do guest appearances where we talk, Q&A.
You're great in the film, by the way.
Oh, thank you very much. I love doing it. You know, I just had 2 strokes, so I was surprised at how it came out so well. But a lot of it had to do with the direction and what he did and his touch. He has a wonderful touch. But as I've traveled around America, I've been surprised at the effect of the people who came to see the movie 2, 3, and sometimes 4 times. Now, I've seen it about 40 times, but I'm in it. You know, it's a very different approach. But I'm telling you that the people have come up to me and they've been very heartfelt, very sincere, that they need this kind of massaging in our society and encouragement.
Love.
Yeah, and love, absolutely. And I mean, if hugs would kill you, I'd be dead. But it's like medicine. It's been just wonderful to have that kind of a response. I'm so grateful.
Well, we are grateful, Dr. Clemmons, that you have taken the time to be with us. There are a lot of demands on your time. You join us here in your new home in Vermont. We're at Shelburne Farms. If you look around us, they say it's an old barn, but it is. Barn doesn't do it justice, so we'll take some shots of it. And we wish you nothing but the best. And as a kid in the 60s who was watching Mr. Rogers and saw you and was influenced by you, I want to say thank you for the millions who are watching right now who you helped. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you for inviting me very much. Thank you.
Think Tank with Steve Adubato has been a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation, celebrating over 30 years of broadcast excellence. Funding for this edition of Think Tank with Steve Adubato has been provided by the Turrell Fund, supporting Right from the Start NJ, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the Russell Berry Foundation, RWJ Barnabas Health, PSE&G, Wells Fargo, and by New Jersey Resources. Promotional support provided by ROINJ and by NorthJersey.com and Local IQ. Transportation provided by Airbrook Limousine, serving the metropolitan New York, New Jersey area.